Hi, Bill.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm doing good.
So it's great to be on the stage once again with Bill Browder, who's one of the greatest fighters for justice and against corruption in the world today. Sometimes you have difficulties because of that role. A year ago, you were not here at the Freedom Forum. Why?
Well, first of all, let me say that how delighted I am to be here today. But a year ago, exactly a year ago, I was traveling to Madrid to meet with the chief Spanish anti-corruption prosecutor to give him information about dirty money going to Spain connected to the murder of my lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky. I've been invited by the prosecutor. I arrive in Madrid. I go to my hotel. The next morning, as I'm leaving my hotel room, there are two Spanish police officers standing outside my room. And with the hotel manager, he translates and he says, "These guys need to see your identification." I show my identification. And they say, "You're under arrest." And I say, "What for?" And they say, "Interpol, Russia." At which point, the hotel manager was very worried that I was going to leave my stuff in the room, and he asked the police officers if I could have a couple minutes to pack up. I start packing up, and I tweet out, "Being arrested in Madrid right now on a Russian Interpol warrant." I get in the police car, and I don't know whether people are actually going to believe that I was being arrested, and they didn't take my phone away, so I took a little picture from the back of the car from the back of their heads with the dashboard and all the paraphernalia there, and I said, "In the car now." And at that point, everybody realized I was being arrested. I went to the police station. At that point, my story went viral around the world, news alerts and everything. And by the time I got to the police station, within an hour, Interpol called up the Spanish police and told them to release me. And so when I say I'm delighted to be here, I really am delighted to be here today.
Who says, by the way, who says Twitter is not a force for good?
Well, but I'm not the only one with travel problems. Don't you have some of your own?
I don't have quite the problems you have. But it turns out when you do certain things and you make certain enemies, that you have to worry about travel a little bit. I haven't had a particular problem, and I got in here to Norway okay, and I presume I'll get out okay. But the president of Turkey, Erdogan, is not a fan of mine for various reasons. We prosecuted a case of a gold trader named Reza Zarrab, who had been charged and prosecuted in Turkey, but then because of connections he had, and because of what I think is monumental corruption and undermining of the rule of law, he was released. The prosecution was ended. Various people who were participants in the prosecution of that kind of malfeasance and corruption were fired. Some of them were charged themselves. Then some years later, we were able to bring the case. And so Erdogan, among other things, tried to get me fired through a meeting with Joe Biden, has accused me, even though I've never stepped foot in Turkey, of helping to foment the failed coup and all sorts of other things. And at a time when Interpol is being abused, one has to worry a little bit when you travel, and I'm not 100% sure that my government will make sure that I'm okay if I travel somewhere and someone's playing games, whether it's out of Turkey or Russia or somewhere else. So anyway, we're all here and we're all very happy about that. Let me ask you this, Bill. So I recently published a book called Doing Justice, and a principal theme of the book is that laws are very important. Constitutions are important. Statutes are important. Lots of places don't have good laws. But as I also argue, good laws are not enough. It takes good people. So at a time when people are worried in America, at least I am, about institutions being undermined, free press being undermined, democratic norms being undermined, truth being undermined, that has nothing to do with the statutes and the law. The laws are pretty much the same in America. What matters often is whether the people who are responsible for enforcing them, interpreting them, are doing their job and are good people and have integrity. So you have spent the last number of years fighting this very important fight, very dramatically and effectively all around the world, to pass a law. So I guess my question is, how important is the law itself to be passed in various countries? And then is the passage of the Magnitsky Act in various countries enough Or does it also take, as I argue, good people to make sure that it's done properly?
When Sergei Magnitsky was killed in Russia, and tortured and killed in Russia, I made a vow. I said, how is I going to get justice for Sergei Magnitsky? And at first we tried getting justice in Russia. The Russian authorities said, absolutely no way. Putin personally got involved in exonerating everybody who killed Sergei Magnitsky. They promoted and gave state honors to some of the people most complicit, and they even prosecuted Sergei Magnitsky 3 years after they killed him in the first ever prosecution against a dead man in the history of Russia. So no chance of justice inside of Russia. So I said, how do we get justice outside of Russia? And I discovered that if a crime is committed in one country, like that, and the authorities in that country want to cover it up, there's effectively no mechanisms to get justice. And for me, that was an unacceptable thought, that Putin and his cronies could absolutely get away with murder. And I thought that I just can't live with myself if that's what's going to happen. And then I said to myself, okay, there's no jurisdiction for murder in Russia that you can prosecute in New York, but all these guys, the ones who killed Sergei Magnitsky for sure, and many others, they do this stuff for money. In Sergei's case, he exposed $230 million crime and did it for money. And I said, we can take that money, we can freeze that money in the West and we can ban their visas. And that became known as the Magnitsky Act. And I hear you about the implementation of laws, but let me tell you something. Just the existence of the Magnitsky Act sent Putin into apoplexy. I mean, because there had never been any consequence ever before for his actions. He made it his single largest foreign policy priority to repeal the Magnitsky Act. He sent Natalia Veselnitskaya to Trump Tower to meet with Donald Trump Jr. To say if Trump gets elected to repeal the Magnitsky Act.
That was about adoptions, I thought.
No. And what we've discovered is that it's now globalized. It doesn't just apply to Russians and Putin. It applies to everybody, all bad guys around the world. And all of a sudden, whenever anyone gets on the list, they go out of their mind. But even for every guy on the list who's going out of their mind, there's 1,000 other guys who aren't on the list who are worried about being put on the list. And even if countries aren't, like the United States, aren't doing this liberally, just the idea of creating a campaign that certain people should be sanctioned, that uncertainty about whether they're going to be sanctioned is a consequence in itself. And so I would argue that in the world that I'm coming from, where there's no laws and no implementation, having a law and a little bit of implementation is a hell of a lot better than nothing.
Can I ask you this? What's impressive to me, a lot of things, your courage, your tenacity, but also you're a private citizen. You're not a lawmaker. You're not in government. You don't have subpoena power like I used to have as a prosecutor. And yet you were able to make a case for these laws in lots of countries around the world. What do you have to say to folks who think, well, I'm not in government, I'm not in power, and that's where actually change can be made, given your experience? And also, by the way, add in there the role of public shaming of governments and officials to get them to do the right thing for the cause of justice.
Well, in a certain way, I have more power than a government official because I'm not constrained to a country, I'm not constrained to a certain protocol, I'm not constrained to the tactics I use. I can go to the press, I can write books, I can do movies, I can do just about anything. And so in a certain way, we all, as activists, if you're vigilant, if you're determined, if you're smart, if you're creative, you can do a lot. And everybody told me at the beginning of my campaign to get sanctions, to get Magnitsky sanctions, is never going to work. They said that to me in the United States. They said that to me in Canada. They said that to me in the UK. They said they're saying that to me in the EU right now. Everybody says it's never going to work. And I would say that the single most important feature of my campaign is that I've never been discouraged. I just keep on hammering away. Sometimes it looks like it's never going to work to me, but I don't spend any time worrying about that, and I just keep on plowing ahead. And I actually, part of the success of the campaign is just the process. It's not even the outcome, it's just the process. By going through and discussing all these issues publicly, by putting officials in a position where they have to say, no, we're going to allow torturers and murderers to come to our country, they ended up looking bad. And because I'm in the game longer than them, we end up succeeding in some countries.
And what's the next frontier?
Well, the next frontier is really Europe. So the Magnitsky Act exists in the United States, Canada, Britain, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. But the problem with that is that, and we have a bunch of people sanctioned, a bunch of bad people from all over the world sanctioned. The problem is that they can all come to Europe. And they love coming to Europe, and they particularly love coming to the south of France, to Italy, to Spain. And at the moment, the European Union is allowing these people to come in with open arms. And that really it has to stop. And the problem with the European Union is the European Union has this foreign policy of absolute consensus. So for example, we're trying to get the EU to do a Magnitsky Act right now, and any one country can block it. And I've been told officially that Hungary is trying to block it. Hungary is a country run by Viktor Orban. Viktor Orban is a good friend of Vladimir Putin's. And so effectively, Putin has a Trojan horse through Viktor Orban in Hungary to block it, which means that the only way we're going to do this in Europe is to do it on a country-by-country basis, which is what I've been doing.
Does it get harder after you've had a number of successes? Because then the countries where you're trying to pass the Magnitsky Act are the more difficult countries? Or does it get easier because people know what it is now? You don't have to explain yourself. You show up and like, oh, it's that Bill Browder guy wants us to pass a law.
I would say that it's just as hard every time. So I've got 6 countries that have done it, and every one of them has said, no, we couldn't do it beforehand, and they did it. And every new country I go to, they say, no, you don't understand our specifics of our country. There's this issue and that issue, and the Russians have big influence here, and there's the far right or the far left or whatever. But in the end, we encountered the same issues. A lot of times the biggest issue is the government itself. So one would think that Putin is my biggest challenge in this exercise, and he's a big challenge for sure. But perhaps my second biggest challenge is the foreign minister of every country I go to. The foreign ministry of every country I go to, their job is to not have any ructions or problems with any country. And so their whole objective is to say, we don't want any problems with anybody, this is going to cause us problems. And the only way that we overcome these foreign ministers is by going to parliamentarians of the country, going to the members of parliament. And so I don't even bother going to the governments anymore. I go to the parliament and I say, do you or do you not want torturers and murderers to come to your country and spend their money in your country? And every parliamentarian can answer that question very easily. No, of course no, we don't want those people. And then those people are the ones who have to put pressure on their foreign ministers and on their governments.
I was laughing a minute ago because, when I was a prosecutor in New York, you look at things through the lens of the rule of law and justice. And without going into detail, we in the Justice Department, and I personally, would have fights with our own State Department and with our own Secretary of State, because my view was, if they had their druthers, if they had their preference, even the State Department in the United States would never let U.S. prosecutors charge anyone in any country ever. I'm overstating that a little bit. Obviously, they care about the rule of law also. But it was always the case that if American prosecutors were trying to extradite someone or trying to, to arrest someone or hold a bank accountable like we did with Bank Paribas, the 4th largest bank in the world, somebody somewhere who was involved in diplomacy thought that it would upset some talk, some treaty, some alliance for some unknown speculative purpose in the future. So sometimes the fight for doing the right thing and for the rule of law and for order and justice and anti-corruption comes up against these legitimate concerns, but they happen in the foreign ministries and at the State Department as well.
And this is where and coming back to your question about as an individual versus a member of government, I'm particularly blessed because I'm totally independent. I'm not trying to do business with any of these people in the future. I don't have any careers that I've got to worry about, and so I can go in and cause all sorts of trouble, all sorts of embarrassment. I can go to the press. I can go to the politicians, and I can make a big fuss. And it doesn't look good for a foreign minister to say, yes, we're going to allow those bad guys to come into the country.
Right. But it's not just that. Just as our time comes to an end, you've made a name for yourself doing this. You have a record of success. There's a track record there. And so that is why, going back full circle to the first story, that is why when you're getting arrested on, an abuse of the Interpol process, and the officials are foolish enough to let you keep your iPhone, and you are able to tweet something out, lots and lots of people see it, and it goes viral, and you have the support. You're not a part of the government, but you have the support of a lot of people who are lawmakers in the U.S. and other places too, which helps a little bit.
Yeah, well, thank God for that. And in a certain way, the longer I do this, the more support I have, and I am on a mission to get this done everywhere else in the world. And I know there's a lot of people here from a lot of countries where a lot of bad things are going on, and I hope that I can work with all of you to expand the Magnitsky Act across the world and to get lots of bad guys who are doing terrible things to you sanctioned in a lot of different countries around the world. Thank you all.
Thank you, folks.